is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback. Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
We're talking baseball. Klazuki. It's Klazuski. Klazuski, Campanella, the man, and Bobby Feller. You know what that is, guys?
No. That's the song.
Yes.
I have that on my. I have that on my.
We're talking baseball.
Oh,
yep. Right.
Yeah, I have that on my phone.
We're talking baseball.
Now, have you ever gone through? You should go through there sometime and think about all the players in that. There are a lot of players that you might have met by this time, Scott. When they're
I was thinking, when that song came out, how sad is it? The new guys were. Yes. The line goes, and now it's the 80s, and Brett is the greatest. And that's 40 years ago.
Yeah, and you say Bobby Bonds has been with everyone or whatever.
Right. Vita Blue's in there. Yeah.
Yes.
So, hey, welcome to the Past Our Prime podcast. Mark Hoffman and Bill Mahoney join me every week to look back at sports from 50 years ago through old issues of Sports Illustrated. This week, June 2nd, 1975, on the cover, Billy Martin. We got our own Billy Mahoney. Tell everyone who's our guest today to talk about that crazy manager known as Alfred Martin.
We've got a man that began part of his baseball career in Texas. He also became a Rangers broadcaster. He also became the Rangers general manager. He's also known as Mr. Ranger after spending 55 years with the organization. Come on, I'm talking about Tom Grieve.
Good. Yeah, he should have some real good stuff on Billy. Looking forward to that. His first managing gig was with the Twins in 1969, and in typical Martin fashion, the results were good on the field, not so much off the field. They win the AL West, and down 0-2 in the ALCS to Baltimore, owner Calvin Griffith wanted Jim Cott, we know him pretty well, to be the Game 3 starter. Martin didn't. Instead, he went with a guy named Bob Miller, who got bombed. When Griffith asked for an explanation, Martin said, "Because I'm the manager." Twins were swept in 3 games, and Martin was fired shortly thereafter, starting a pattern. He goes there 1 year, takes them to the playoffs, and he's gone. Out of baseball for a year, he's hired by the Tigers. And Mark, more of the same.
Really good. He turned the Tigers from a losing record in 1970 into winners in 72 and 73.
Yeah, as you've said many times, that A's dynasty almost never was if the Tigers could have won that Game 5 of the ALCS in 72.
Don't get me into the 1972 ALCS because the Tigers should have won Game 1
in Game 2,
and then they would have won the series in 4. Instead, they lose in 5 because of Vita Blue.
53 years ago, and he's still not over it.
Hey, that was the strike shortened year. The strike stopped the first 2.5 weeks of the season, and instead of making up the games, they just picked it up and didn't make up the games. Tigers played one more game than the Red Sox and won the division by half a game.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Insane. Letter from the publisher says that Martin was on the cover back in 1956 while playing for the Yankees, and that the 19 years in between then and now is the longest period of time in between covers of SI. I'm not saying Sports Illustrated is wrong, but when I did a search, I saw a cover of SI with Martin on the cover when he was managing the Twins in July of 1969. So not sure if I have this wrong or they do. I do know that he was on it again in 1985 when he was back in pinstripes with the Yankees. Be interesting if Twins fans catch this in the 19th hole in the coming weeks. I'm sure they'll let us know if, in fact, he was on the cover. It had a date on it and everything, so not sure about that. But scorecard, boys, what jumped out at you guys this week? Bill?
I got something that's called Up the Middle. Three football teams from a local San Antonio high school bellied up to the banquet table to see, this is all for charity, which could gain the most weight by eating pancakes. In less than 40 minutes, they gobbled up 2,636 pancakes, an average of nearly 44 per man. For the record, the winning MacArthur High School gained an average of 5.5 pounds per man for a total of 110.25 pounds. The MVP of the entire event was 202-pound Eddie Lee, who plays tackle for Alamo Heights High. He ate more than 50 pancakes to become a 222-pounder. They say he'll be back on his feet in time for the first game next fall.
My goodness.
When
You know
I did a
why?
blog in Vegas,
Huh?
I went to one of these things, but it wasn't pancakes. It was a wing eating contest.
Was it normal wings or hot wings?
No, it was regular wings. Your
Okay.
regular wings. They none of them had, hots, nothing like that. They just you had a bucket, like they were in pails, and they were in front of 15 tables, and they're
Ah,
all different sizes, men and women, heavy, thin, doesn't matter. And it's just there's a sound that goes with eating things really fast that is a disgusting sound. It's just like because the food's coming out of your mouth while they eat.
yeah.
Ugh. I
And they're chewing, and then all of a sudden you'll see that, like, there was one girl in there. She was doing well, just really not going fast but not going slow, just sort of in the middle. She's smiling and eating it. All of a sudden I go back like 5 minutes later, and she smiles and then just reaches over and goes right
Oh,
over off the table.
mm,
Yeah, it is. So I don't know what these guys were doing. Maybe they did really well at the pancake one. There was no puking, but it's a terrible sight. Terrible sight.
I'm worried if you have wings, you're going to swallow the bone. You're going to choke to death.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
same with
they did. No,
same
they
with
eat everything. You're supposed to eat everything off the bone too. There's
Mm,
nothing that can be left.
same with
okay.
hot dogs. I keep waiting for someone to choke on one of those.
Yes. Oof.
All right. That's pretty gross. Go ahead, Mark. What do you got?
Mine's gross in a different kind of way that I think today, if someone was wearing this kind of hairstyle, the girls would go, ew. Then they might go, hey. Uh, they had I guess, I don't know who kept stats on this, but the San Francisco Giants may be third in the division, but they lead the league in something else. Permanent waves. Yes, they had six players on their team, not counting the trainer and Dave Kingman, who was later traded to the Mets, who actually, curly perms, where,
Yeah.
Yeah.
all curled up. Even on the windiest day in Candlestick Park, our hair jumps right back into place. I'm
Yeah,
trying to
that
think if
was
there are any ball players now. I mean, perms were popular in the 70s.
Did
they
anyone
were.
in your family have one? Like my stepfather had a perm.
No, but I went to high school with a lot of guys that had perms and stuff. I couldn't do it. I had wavy hair. Nor would I choose to do it. And some people, you go to the hair salon, I guess, to get those perms done.
I think we should
I
bring
just
them
want to know
back.
who keeps stats of that.
Elias
Yeah.
Sports Bureau.
And Vidal Sassoon.
Right, right. Mark, they said it.
They said it. We're going to go with Shirley Cha-Cha Maldani, the woman hot rod racer that they made the movie Heart Like a Wheel. Anyway, so she's licensed by the NHRA and explains what motivates her to drive a top fuel dragster. Quote, I want to be the fastest woman in the world, in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, you better be careful. Better be
Yes.
careful. I liked Steve Wright, wandering offensive tackle who most recently played for the Chicago Fire on the wave of big money offers being made by the WFL. I just got $1 million offer from the WFL, $1 a year for a million years, which reminded me when the A's, who are notoriously cheap, and there was someone said that they matched the Dodgers offer for Shohei Ohtani. It was $1 a year for 750 million years. Splashdown
Yeah,
at the
you're right on that one.
Speedway. We
Yeah.
talked about the Indy 500 a couple of weeks ago when AJ Foyt was on the cover looking to win his fourth Indy. We had Scott Gager on when we asked him about what he remembered most about that 75 race. Immediately said, "Was that the one with all the rain?" Yes. In a word, yes, it was. The race ended when the rain started with only 174 of the 200 laps finished. Bobby Unsers declared the winner, second time in his great career. there's a big crash in that race, Mark. Some of these guys almost never even got started in this race.
Well, Tom Sneva was involved in a huge one. I think half his car was sewed off. I think
Oof.
he's like sitting in the car and there's no rear to it. But I mean, it's a spectacular crash, and he just walks away from it like it's nothing. And then you think of Dale Earnhardt, where when you saw that crash, it didn't look like he hit the wall that hard, but it killed him.
Yeah.
So it's just, I guess you can't sense the speed and the way the car hits and stuff like that. But this was such a spectacular crash, and he walked away.
I'll never forget. I saw the Dale Earnhardt crash. Saw it live when it happened,
Hmm.
and I was in Arizona during spring training, and then I went out to the hot tub, and I'm sitting out there, and there's some other people come, maybe like I don't know, 20, 30 minutes later, and I hear them talking, and they're like, "Oh yeah, did you hear about Dale Earnhardt? He crashed and he died." And
Wow.
I'm thinking to myself, I'm like,
What are you talking
I
about?
saw the crash. There's no way he died. Can't, what are you crazy?
Yeah.
And yeah, and then, I've listened to other people who are like racing experts, and they said that like they could tell right away that he was in danger by the way he hit the wall. So I don't know. It didn't look like much,
No.
but it sure was one of the all-time greats. Paris right there on the track. The rain wasn't a cold,
Oh.
damp storm, but a hot, muggy one with track temps nearing 130 degrees before the start. So, man, that is not someplace you want to be down on pit row at the beginning of that race.
Did you read a little bit about AJ Foyt though? That he had an errant piece of metal went into his cockpit. It had broken loose and became lodged under his rump,
Oh,
causing what the hospital called contusions of the upper hip. But he never, ever, they said AJ refused to take the time to get out of the car to remove it. So he
hey.
had this piece of metal in his ass the whole race.
Well, he was a hard ass.
Yeah, obviously. Come on. How many times have you ever had a rock in your shoe when you're driving? You're like, damn it. You find a way to get that shoe off. I couldn't picture having a piece of metal in my butt or my hip and going, I think I'm going another 200 miles. That's the difference between them and me,
I was
obviously.
just going to say they were built differently back then, weren't
Yes.
they? Yeah,
Now they'd be off for like 9 months.
right. Let's talk a little bit NBA Finals. The Warriors were bulletproof. Before there was Steph Curry, the greatest Golden State Warriors player ever was without a doubt Rick Barry. And he cemented that with his performance against the Bullets as the Warriors sweep the NBA Finals. They were underdogs against just about everyone all season, including Washington in the finals. In fact, some had said it would be the greatest mismatch in NBA history, and they were right. It turned out to be a mismatch, but in the other way, as Golden State wins all four games in a very strange series because of the scheduling and all that kind of stuff. But Warriors win their first championship in San Francisco back 50 years ago.
But it wasn't as lopsided as you think. Yeah, they won in four, but they won the first game by six, the second game by one, the third game by eight, and the fourth game by one.
Yeah.
And in that game two, they were down by 13 points, and then Barry scored 36 points, and they rallied to win 92-91. So there were a bunch of games that the Bullets could have won, and all of a sudden you have a 2-2 series, with game five, and anything could have happened then.
True.
I thought the confusion prior to the series even starting was sort of fun with that the setup called for the first two games to be played in Washington, the next two in Oakland, and the remaining games to be alternated. Then it was discovered that, as we all know, the ice follies take precedence. They had first call in the Oakland Coliseum, and then the Warriors couldn't play the fourth game in the Cow Palace because of karate championship. I'm not sure if it was the All City one with Daniel, but it could have been. But Washington decided to do they'd open away and then play the next three at home, and they lost. And it's only the first time in NBA's final histories, in the first time in the NBA Finals history, in which a team who did not have the home court advantage swept the series.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well, in San Antonio, they have the rodeo show that makes the
yeah.
Spurs leave town for like about 2 weeks.
And
But
nowadays, Mark, that
in the
would never
playoffs,
happen. Like if they had a rodeo at the crypto arena
yeah.
when the Lakers were playing a team, the rodeo would be gone.
where they would never schedule it in June
Yes,
and in April,
exactly.
May,
But back
or
in those
June.
days, the ice follies, rodeo,
Yeah.
clown shooting, they took precedence over the teams, NBA and NHL.
Did you say clown shooting?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's what
just in
I was
case,
gonna.
man.
Who's shooting the
I would
clowns?
actually pay to go see that.
Hey, man, that's you just, I've been to my clown shoot. Yeah, clown
Is that
shooting.
like
It's
you
right
shoot at
up there,
rodeo
buddy.
clowns?
Yes,
Ah,
I should. Hey, think you go home and you go, they fucking blew, excuse me, they blew that clown up.
it's not the same thing, Mark. I don't know. This is my first rodeo. I have not ever been to a rodeo. I know Bill has, and
Uh,
apparently, maybe I should go. I'd go look. I'd go if they were shooting clowns.
at
That
the end,
sounds
at the
good.
end of the rodeo, they always shoot the clowns. It's
Nice.
just, it's a real fun time for everybody.
No, the clowns are the
The
most
kids are
dangerous
just
job.
screaming. Ah!
Yes,
No,
they're all having a good time too. Oh my God, they shot another clown. Let's go home and get barbecue.
probably
From the
life of the
NBA
movie.
Finals to the Stanley Cup Finals, humidity in Buffalo made the ice look like a Sherlock Holmes movie. Hound of the Baskervilles with the fog rolling up off the ice. Flyers goaltender Bernie Perront, whom we had on last year after Philly won the cup, said, I wouldn't take my boat out in these conditions. And he told us how much he likes being on his boat. So that must have been really bad. Yeah, it was really hot in Buffalo because hello, they're not used to playing hockey in June in Buffalo. It made for quite a strange sensation there on the ice, Bill.
Yeah, they said it was thick as pea soup, and they couldn't see the puck on the ice. So what Perrant said, he goes, there was certain times guys would come down, and he had no idea where the puck was. I mean, it's amazing in those days they played the games in those conditions.
Right?
There wasn't even a thought of like, no, we need to postpone this and start tomorrow and figure this out. No, they just thought, oh, a pea soup on the ice, let's do it.
Yeah.
Shooting clowns, let's do it. It just never mattered.
What about the French Connection?
Hey, they had 1 point in the first two games. They had 10 points in the next two games, the two games that played in Buffalo. So they came back and found their game. We'll see how they do in the final two games of the series and see what happens.
Net result, a capital game. This is about a guy named, what's it, Alan Ritzenberg, who's a tennis pro and a great college player in
Yep.
D.C. And tell me about him, Billy.
Oh, he was a guy that taught tennis lessons, and it was before really anybody cared about tennis. And what really got me was the fact when he first started teaching lessons for a half hour, it was 50 cents. So 50 cents for a half hour lesson from a guy that actually was a very good tennis player. Yes, in 1975, he had raised it to $30 for a half hour, but this Ritzenberg was amazing. He was the number one player in the world at 85 in the 85 and over age group. So he could play and he could teach, but I think he taught a few famous people as well. It's not sure who they are, Mark.
Well, I was
Mark doesn't know
fascinated.
either.
I don't.
Mark doesn't know who he taught either. Mark, I set
No,
you
no.
up there. I gave you a
Set me
softball
up
and said
again.
he
Set
also
me up
taught
again.
famous people.
Set me
You're
up
supposed to
again.
go,
I was reading my paragraph
for the
when you
love of
said
God, Scott, I just threw him a softball. Softball.
Softball.
throw me another softball.
No, you know who it is. Tell me who he taught.
Apparently, in the spring of '61, he gets a call that the president, JFK, John F. Kennedy's wife, would like to receive tennis lessons on the White House court. So he ended up giving lessons to Jackie Kennedy. And he said she didn't have the athletic background of some of the Kennedys, but she was well coordinated and improved her game considerably. And then word got out that, Jackie was playing tennis.
Good for her. So we know that they're playing tennis. They've got a swimming pool at the White House. Do they get any work done when they're there?
No.
NBC and the new college try. College basketball and NBC are teaming up. The big news here isn't necessarily that NBC and the NCAA are going to televise 90 plus games starting this coming November or no, back then, but that they chose college hoops instead of the ABA. They had to pick between the two, and they went with college. And really, you could say that this was the beginning of the end of the ABA. They didn't get that major TV deal. Mark, you said all the time that you'd watch a game here and there,
Oh, yeah.
that they weren't on regularly.
No.
And, end of 1976, that's it for the ABA.
CBS did like a Saturday game of the week for a short time, but it was not that long. And I think it wasn't just the end of the ABA. What this did is it elevated college basketball, and I think it was the right decision NBC made because college basketball became huge, in the coming years after this. When UCLA won their early titles, like I remember when they won their title beating Jacksonville. I want to say that was 1970. It was on like at about 11 in the morning. It was over like by 1. I went outside thinking, hey, people might be celebrating UCLA won. Nothing, crickets. So, college basketball wasn't like a limelight sport except for that UCLA Houston Alcindor versus Elvin Hayes game. But then in the 70s, it started with more television coverage. It picked up. And then, of course, in 79, when you got Magic versus Bird, that really blew the
That was
roof off.
huge. That was
That was
huge.
the first one. Yeah, one of the ones I watched. Yeah.
And then that trio of Enberg, Billy Packer, and McGuire too. They really elevated the sport. And next thing you knew, late 70s, early 80s, it really started to pick up. Yeah, the Magic game for sure.
They moved the championship game to a Monday night prime time as opposed to a Saturday afternoon that it was.
Yeah.
Middle of the day.
There was nothing better than Big Monday back in the 80s, man. That was just great for college hoops. Baseball, nothing could be finer. Billy Martin is on the cover of this issue of SI, but another Yankees second baseman who won 7 World Series in New York is making a name for himself as a baseball coach at the University of South Carolina, the number 2 ranked team in the nation. Bobby Richardson. Bobby Richardson could not be more different than Billy Martin. He's a Bible thumping, Bible reading, no smoking, no drinking kind of guy. That's just fine with his players in South Carolina. They're 47-4-1 and heading to the College World Series. And here's another thing that I just realized today. Do you guys know why are college baseball coaches not called managers?
Are they also teachers?
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I thought you knew.
Right?
No, I have no idea.
They call him the South Carolina baseball coach, and they call Billy Martin and all the others their managers.
They
Wow, I
don't
wonder
call
why.
college managers. In other sports, they call them the same, head
Yeah.
coaches. In baseball, the title of manager for head coach stems from the sport's early day. Early baseball teams, often run by players, had a single manager who oversaw both on-field and off-field operational details. So one of the players and they'd have someone on the bench, overseeing everything and, just managing everything. And that's how the term came to be.
Makes sense.
Yep, there you go.
Mark, tell me about Bobby Richardson as a player.
Well, he was an 8-time All-Star. He was the MVP of the 1960 World Series. What's significant about that? He was on the losing team. The Yankees lost to the Pirates in 7 on Bill Mazeroski's dramatic walk-off homer.
Yeah, he was a good fielder and retired at the age of 31 because he wanted to spend more time with his family. He had 5 kids, big family, and was still a very good ball player. Had like 160 hits his last year and said, nope, I'm done. So,
and that was actually the truth. Most of these guys say they're spending time with their family.
Right.
Don't really mean it. He actually did.
Yeah. Coach Tommy Lasorda, in other baseball news, took over as interim manager of the Dodgers because of the death of Walter Alston's father. Alston would return and manage the Dodgers until retiring at the end of the 76 season. And at that time, Lasorda took over as skipper of the Dodgers. Both guys are in the Hall of Fame as managers. So 2 of the very best, Walter Alston and then Tommy Lasorda. Lasorda is what, from 76 to 93? 95?
That was 95, I think.
Okay. And retired because I remember that day he had started having heart issues, had a small heart attack.
Well, I had Lasorda on the Larry King show that I produced for the Dodger Network. And I remember a story where he had a stomach ache and he was complaining, and his wife said, go see the doctor. And it was because of that stomach ache they detected the heart issue.
Right.
If he had not waited till the next day or not gone, he might have died.
Right.
And Tommy actually didn't remember that at first, but then when we got into it, he remembered.
A couple of pitchers caught your eye. Let's go with you first, Billy.
Yeah, Louis Tiant. he drank castor oil and beat the Angels 6-1. Now, back in the day on the TV shows, I remember the Brady Bunch, the kids that drink castor oil. Have you guys ever drank castor oil? And what the
I
hell is
hope
it?
I never do. No.
Yeah. I don't even know what it
No,
is.
but it was a big deal back at the time. I'm not saying you even needed that to beat the Angels, but man, castor oil can't be good.
I drank Pennzoil.
Yes,
Oh
because you're a
God.
Pennzoil guy.
No.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mark?
Well, I got one on Mickey Lolich. Mickey would drink like soda pop. That was his beverage of choice. And he actually drank 64 ounces while he beat the Twins 5-3. And Mickey was kind of a roly-poly guy, so you can see why.
Lolich was a very
Castor oil.
underrated pitcher.
He's still alive, even though
Yeah,
he's
he is.
a dude.
He is. I looked
Still
at that
alive.
too.
He's
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
turn 85 this year.
Yeah. And then
Talk a
one
little-
final one.
Yeah,
The
go ahead.
Phillies, Tom Underwear. He pitched a four-hitter to beat the Braves 4-1.
Ah,
Yeah,
one of Mark's favorites.
it is.
course.
It is. Old Underwood underwear.
Let's talk a little golf, Billy. If your game feels sick, visit Dr. Swing. Tell me about this character.
It's Bob Toski. He, if you look back, it was 20 years prior, 20 years from 75 or 21 years. He was the leading PGA money winner in 1954 when his 4 victories included the World Championship of Golf. And he was a great swing coach. People would go to him. Professionals would come to him and learn how to improve their swing. But the thing that stood out to me was he was 118 pounds, 5'7", 118.
That's insane.
I mean, but the thing is it's funny because he's probably was underrated his whole life, but he was an amazing golfer and obviously an amazing golf coach as well.
Love, hate, and Billy Martin. Billy Martin in his second season with the Rangers. There won't be a third. Heck, he won't even finish his second. The great manager does 2 things exceptionally well: turn losing teams into winners and wear out his welcome, and he does them both rather quickly. As we mentioned earlier, he won a division title in his only year in Minnesota. He turned the Tigers around a couple years later and then was canned. Last year, he wins AL Manager of the Year in Texas in 1974 and says now, I have a real foundation here. I think I'll stay here for the rest of my career. 6 weeks later, he was fired. So
Just
he
think of
was,
all the Steinbrenner Martin drama we would have missed if that was the case.
Yes.
right. We would have gotten drama somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But
But
he was a
you know,
character.
it is funny in this article, the pictorial showing him coaching the Twins, the Tigers, and the Rangers. And in the picture with the Tigers, he's arguing with the umpires. And what's the thing that stands out to me about this picture? The umpires are wearing ties.
Yeah.
Young people today don't realize umpires used to wear ties.
And so did the people in the stands.
Yeah. Yep. Now we're happy if they just wear clothes.
Yep.
Yes. I just like there was a part and they talked about, was it where I read a little article on Billy Martin, the comment he made about Steinbrenner and
Reggie
Richardson. One's a convict and one's a liar.
Yeah.
Oh man, he was Ozzie Guillen before Ozzie Guillen.
Yeah. I mean, he really just did not give a flying F,
No, he did not.
He was the MVP of the 53 World Series. So another thing he and Bobby Richardson had in common, he was best buddies with Mickey Mantle. His antics as a player were legendary, but it was his time as a manager that he is most known for. He would take losing teams and turn them into winners time and time again. I was surprised actually that he's not in the Hall of Fame, but he doesn't have like this great resume. He has a nice winning percentage. He only won 1 World Series. His claim to fame really was these kind of short bursts where he would go and take a really bad team and make them a lot better. And he did that repeatedly.
Yep.
He just would then get fired for something usually off field, but not always. But he was a great manager. There's no 2 ways about it. Joining us now is someone who played for Billy Martin on that 1975 team and had a firsthand account of what that was like. Tom Grieve played in the majors for 9 years, and in 1975, he had a career year under Martin until the following year in 76 when he surpassed those numbers while Martin was now in New York. When Tom's playing days were over after the 1979 season, 5 years later, he was the general manager of the Rangers, held that position for 10 years. And when that ended, his time with the Rangers, well, it did not, as he served as a broadcaster for the team starting in 1995, going through 2022. There is a reason he is in the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame. And the man known as Mr. Ranger, Tom Grieve, joins us now on the Past Our Prime podcast. Hey, Tom, how are things today in Arlington?
Everything's good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Wonderful. You're welcome. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about that Rangers team from the mid-'70s. Not a very successful organization to that point, the Rangers. And then they hire Billy Martin, and he does what he does. He gets a team to start playing better. What was it like to play for Billy Martin?
Well, I remember when Billy took over the team in 1973, Whitey Herzog had been hired to be the manager with a long-term goal of turning the team around and becoming a winning team. Bob Short was the owner. He was losing a lot of money, and he lost patience with the long-term plan. And when Billy left Detroit, Bob Short did everything he could to hire Billy. It was kind of a shocking move, a build for the team future under a aspiring young manager, Whitey Herzog, replaced by Billy Martin. But Billy was very successful and had always been successful turning teams around. But I'll never forget the meeting that we had when he joined the team. He came into that meeting and he said, among other things, I didn't take this job so that you could become a 500 team and everybody would be happy that we were better. I came in here because we're going to win. And if you believe that, then you can come into my office and I'll make sure that you're not here tomorrow. Well, obviously nobody did that. But when he left the room, we all looked at each other as if to say, if he thinks we're going to win, he must never have watched us play, because we were a terrible team. We were a terrible team. And the only time we ever even thought about winning was when Billy said that. But, you know, things happen. Made a trade for Fergie Jenkins. Jim Bibby won 19 games. Fergie won 25 games. Jeff Burroughs was the MVP. Two rookies. Mike Hargrove was Rookie of the Year. Jim Sundberg made the All-Star team. So I mean, we had the makings of a good team. And 1974 was a really good team. They made a record about it. As a matter of fact, they called us the turnaround gang under Billy Martin. Drew 1 million people for the first time. So he had a dramatic effect immediately on our franchise. I wouldn't say he turned us into a winner, but we had a winning season. Came in second, so good that year. We might have been a strong pennant contender, but he was successful, and he did what he was hired to do, which was turn the team around.
I saw a quote from you that said something to the effect that Martin made players afraid to lose. Oftentimes, players can't perform under that kind of pressure. How did Billy get you guys to play so well, using a tactic of fear, if you will?
I can remember one time after a game, I happened to be the first one back into the clubhouse, and they didn't provide food service in the clubhouse then like they do now, but there was a big plate of potato chips in the middle of the clubhouse, and as I walked by, I just instinctively reached down, grabbed a potato chip, and started eating it. And this was after a terrible loss that we just had. And I had no idea Billy was right behind me. And, you know, he starts screaming. And I won't obviously use the language he used about, if I played like you guys played, I wouldn't be able to eat after a game. So, yeah, stick your face in that food. I hope it tastes good. And it just went on. And I just wanted to disappear and sat down in my locker. Didn't know what to think about it. But, you know, the next day, before practice even started, he came up to me and he said, don't take that personal. That was something that I had to say. I had to get it off my chest. You're the first one I saw. I don't hold grudges, so don't take that personal. And, you know, that's kind of the first conversation I had with Billy where I saw the reason why players love to play for him, because those kind of things happened all the time with him.
This is Bill Tom. I want to know, what was your relationship? How did your relationship with Billy Martin develop, and what did you think about him?
I love Billy. I think as a player, and I would be very surprised if you talked to every player that you could on those teams he was there, and maybe wherever he was, that we felt like we were a better team because he was our manager. All things being equal, when that game started, we felt we would win because our manager was better than the manager on the other team. And I don't mean that to slight other managers. I just mean it to sing the virtues of Billy Martin. He was fearless as a manager. He paid no attention to what the fans wanted, to what the media wanted, to what the owner wanted. He did it his way. He talked about on-base percentage before people even knew what on-base percentage was. None of us, at least me, I never thought a walk was anything great. It was like breaking even. But, he had Mike Hargrove, who wasn't a fast runner, lead off on occasion. Toby Harrah batted at the top of the lineup. He walked 100 times. And he was kind of like a lot like Earl Weaver in that regard. Get men on base and then look for the big inning. And that's pretty much what baseball is now, 50 years later.
And how was it? Just, you look at what he did. I had read that he found what players did well and put them in the position to do well. How was he so good at knowing what guys did well and to get the best out of them?
I think that was just a talent that he had. Some of the old time scouts, even some of the present day scouts, are just better at finding prospects than other scouts on other teams. Billy had a keen eye for the game. He learned under Casey Stengel. He always talked about how much he learned under Casey Stengel, but he knew the game. He understood the game, and he understood players. Billy was a underdog kind of player without great physical tools. He became an excellent big league player. I think he appreciated that kind of a player. He knew what he could do to make you better. And he really was a master at finding spots for a player to play where that player could be successful. On that one team, not to say that we were great players, but I was a right-hand hitter. Jim Fregosi was a right-hand hitter. Jim Spencer was a left-hand hitter. Mike Hargrove was a left-hand hitter. And so we platooned. And to give you an idea of how he was a player's manager, not only did he sense that all of us would be better players if we played in that role, but he came up to me on the bench one day. I hadn't played in a number of days because we hadn't faced a left-handed pitcher. And he came down during the game, which he'd never done with me, and said to me, look, I know you haven't played in a while, and you're probably disappointed, but after this game, we're going to Oakland, and we're going to face Kenny Holtzman and Vida Blue, two left-handed pitchers. And I need you to be at the top of your game. I'm counting on you. You're going to be an important part of that series in Oakland. So you be ready for that when we get to Oakland. And when he left, I can't say I was sitting on the bench brooding about not playing, but, that kind of goes through your mind. But when he left, I felt like $1 million. I felt like I was the best player on the team. I don't remember what I did in Oakland, but I felt like I would be successful, and I was sky high after that meeting. That was just an example of one interaction that I had with him, but that was very commonplace with all the guys on the team. He had a way to make you feel better, and he had a way to make average players who weren't playing, 162 games a year get the most out of our ability and play to our capabilities. He was a master at that.
Hi, this is Mark, Tom. Billy, as you alluded to, was a player, a really good player with the Yankees. He was tough as nails. How much the fact that he played the game, and it was maybe he wasn't the most talented player, but he was the toughest, helped translate to success as a manager?
I think he was the kind of guy, he wasn't a big guy, but he was the kind of guy, he just had a way about him. And I won't call it cockiness, but he had instant charisma. If you saw him with a group of other people, I think your eyes would gravitate toward him for whatever reason. I don't know whether he had a look, the way he looked, the way he acted, the way he stood, the way he walked, but definitely the way he talked with confidence, with bravado. And he was a little cocky, but he did it in a way that commanded respect. And I don't know anybody on that team. I don't know that everybody on that team loved him. Some of the guys might have thought they should have played a little bit more for whatever reason. But I don't know anyone on that team that didn't instantly respect him. And it happened in that team meeting I mentioned where he talked about winning the next year. And he didn't do it gratuitously. He did it in a way where, we didn't see how it was going to happen, but we believed that he believed it. And just that attitude and that style that he had commanded respect. And I think gave him a head start as being a good manager for your ball club.
I remember the day that Billy passed on Christmas Day in '89. I was in the car, and when I heard the news, it was shocked me because it was way too young. Do you remember that day and your reaction to when it happened?
Yeah, I remember that day, and I loved Billy Martin while I played for him. I had fond memories of him when I didn't play for him any longer. I followed him, obviously, when he was with the Yankees, and I was a general manager. So even though I can't say that we kept in close contact or anything like that, I had a feeling for him that when I read the news, heard the news about his passing in that car accident, that it was a very sad moment. I think it was for his family, for the people that played for him, for fans, and for baseball in general. He was sometimes a misunderstood guy. He was sometimes a guy that wore out his welcome, but for most of us that played for him, he will always hold a warm spot in our heart.
Let me ask, what was it? You just said that a little bit. What are some of the misconceptions about Martin? Because we always heard fiery.
Yeah, I don't know that there were misconceptions about Billy. He was, at least to me, a difficult guy to unravel or to understand. He loved to win. He played hard. He demanded that you play hard. He was the kind of guy. He's the best manager I ever played for, without a doubt. And from the time one game started till that game ended, there was nobody better. Obviously, it's well chronicled that he had his problems between the time one game ended and the next game started. At times he probably had altercations. He might have had problems where he drank a little too much. And so, there might have been the misconception this guy was a mean guy that didn't have compassion, which nothing could be further from the truth. He might have been the kind of guy that an average fan might look at and go, man, the way this guy is, I bet players hate playing for him. So, but I think the people that knew him, the people that watched him up close, I don't think there was any misconceptions about him. People saw his limits. They saw his mistakes. They saw the way he managed, the way he played, the success that he's had. And I don't know that there were a lot of misconceptions about him, other than maybe people thought he was a lot tougher to deal with than he really was as a player. Now, if you were in the front office, that might be a different story as far as getting along with him.
You're in the AL West. You're going up against a great Oakland A's team. In 1973, you guys are 57 and 105, and the A's have just won 2 of 3 straight World Series. And yet in 74, as you just mentioned, he comes in and tells you guys that he believes you can win, and he believed it. That was really his genius, was convincing 25 other guys that they could be better than they were. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think that was a strong characteristic that he had, and I saw that up close and personal. I'm sure it happened in Minnesota. Same thing. I'm sure it happened in Detroit. To a certain regard, and Billy Ball, I think it happened in Oakland. They didn't win, but it turned the performance of that team around. So yeah, there's no doubt. When that meeting was over, as I said, we didn't feel like there was any way we would win next year, but there was no doubt that he felt that way. And there was no doubt that we felt he would accept us being a mediocre team. And there was no way we'd ever talk that way or exhibit any behavior around him that could give him any reason to believe that we didn't feel like we were going to win. Now, it wasn't just taking the exact same team and making us better, although a lot of guys did play better for him. But, as I mentioned, he gave 2 young players a chance to play. Mike Hargrove right out of A-ball, and Jim Sundberg had only had, I don't even know, 200 at-bats in the minor leagues. Sonny was an all-star. Mike Hargrove was Rookie of the Year. And an interesting story about Sonny that year. Billy was tough on Sonny. He was tough on catchers. One time Fergie was pitching in Minnesota, and he was facing Larry Heisel. And Billy wanted Sonny to call sliders to Larry Heisel. Didn't want him to throw a fastball. So Sonny puts down the sign for a slider. Fergie shakes him off. He knows Sonny that he has to throw him a slider, so he does it 2 more times, and both times Fergie shook him off. And so Sonny said to himself, the hell with it. This guy's going to the Hall of Fame. If he wants to throw a fastball, who am I to shake him off again? So Fergie threw a fastball. Larry Heisel hit a home run. And after the game, Billy was irate, livid at Sonny, screaming at him. Told Dan O'Brien, our general manager, they had to send him to the minor leagues. And, Sonny was a tough guy himself. And, Sonny stood up for himself and said, look, I called the slider 3 times. He shook it off 3 times, and it's Fergie Jenkins. So I did whatever I could. Anyway, that was an example of Billy loved Sonny, brought him to the big leagues straight out of the minor leagues with basically no experience. Sonny was playing great for him, but that game went against the way Billy wanted it to go because Fergie threw a fastball instead of a slider, and Billy took it out on Sonny and let him have it. So you had to be, you had to at times have tough skin to play for Billy, but I think if you did and you respected him, then you looked at those things as opportunities for him to teach you something. And I think that's what Sonny did. And Sonny, again, had a great year and became Rookie of the Year.
Even though I was born in Chicago and grew up in Los Angeles, I had an aunt from Detroit, so I was a Tigers fan since I was a little kid. And I remember Billy's years as the Tigers manager. He took a team that had really struggled in 1970 and then turned them into, they were 1 game away from going to the World Series in 72. But you were talking about his eye for talent. I mean, him seeing John Hiller, a guy who had a heart attack, and say, hey, that guy can be a closer, a full-time closer, and discovering Ron LaFleur in a prison league. Was it his eye for talent that maybe set him apart, that he could see stuff that other people couldn't?
I think that set him apart. I think his eye for talent was one part of it. The other part of it is that he was a risk taker and didn't care what people thought. Maybe having Ron LaFleur on the team was a risk. Maybe John Hiller was a risk, but he was willing to accept that risk. Didn't care what anybody thought, and he needed to have control. He wasn't going to be a good manager for a team where the general manager or the owner suggested the lineup to him or said, well, maybe Ron LaFleur needs some seasoning. That wasn't going to work with Billy. Billy wanted the authority to make the decisions and live with the results. And he could easily say, look, my results speak for themselves. I need control. I need the ability to make my own decisions. And when he made them, he lived with them, and he wasn't afraid of what the consequences might be. So if you're a John Hiller, and I don't know John's background before then, I know Ron LaFleur's to a certain degree, but when Billy Martin stuck up for them and said those things, they had to feel a new sense of drive, determination, and confidence. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with the success they had. He recognized the talent and what they could bring to the team, but the way that he developed their confidence, their character, and their ability to go out and rise above whatever their defects were, I think was another thing that set them apart.
You guys improved by a large margin in 74. You go from 57 and 105 to 84 and 76. So in 75, you guys must really think that you have a chance to compete. And this issue of SI with Martin comes out in early June. But just 6 weeks later, Martin gets shown the door. This was a pattern of his that would remain throughout his managerial career. What happened to go from fiery genius on the cover of SI to out of a job before July was over?
It's hard to say. I think a lot of things went into that. And I don't want to, I certainly don't want to point fingers at anybody, but a lot of guys who had career years in 1974 fell back a little bit in 1975. For instance, Jeff Burroughs was the MVP in 1974. In 1975, Jeff hit 229. Sonny was the all-star catcher in 74. In 75, I think he hit below 200. Jim Bibby won 19 games in 74. In 75, he won 2. And even though Fergie had, for what any other pitcher would describe a career year, he went from 25 and 12 to 18 and 17. So, really good players who have been excellent players in 74 didn't have those kind of years in 75. So that's one thing. We didn't play as well in 75 as we did in 74. As far as what went into Billy getting fired beyond the one-loss record, I think he had some disagreements with ownership. I think there might have been some personnel decisions that he wasn't allowed to make that upset him. He might have had some off-the-field altercations at local establishments after ball games. It might have been a number of different things that led up to this. But whereas there was an incredible upward feeling as far as the attitude of the team in 74, in 75, that same thing wasn't repeated. It just, and I don't know whether Billy didn't engender it as much, whether the players didn't play as well, whether his problems off the field were the main issue. But I think if you add up all those ingredients, that's probably what contributed to it.
Yeah, and let me ask I'm going to ask a question that'll be maybe out of left field on this, but I read a story that Billy Martin wanted the John Denver "Thank God I'm a Country Boy" song played for the 7th inning stretch. Is that story true, and did that lead sort of a downfall with management?
You know what? I've seen that same story. I don't remember it at the time, but the one thing I regret about being 77 years old is there's a lot of things I don't remember detail-wise back then that I wish I did. But I've seen that story, and it's not unlike something that would upset Billy. It sounds like a simple thing, but I think if it's true, it could be another example of Billy wanting control of everything. And if he didn't get it, it upset him. So he wants that song, whether he liked that song, he thought the team liked that song, he felt the fans like. I don't know what the reason for it was, but I could see not getting his way on that being a much bigger issue for him than people on the outside looking in might have thought that it should be. I could have seen that for sure. There were some great things that happened in 1975. I just got to mention this one thing while I'm thinking. It came to my mind. Willie Davis played for us, the great Dodger player. He'd come to Texas, and there's a guy that was misunderstood. This guy was a great teammate. He was different, and if you got a room next to him, you might hear him doing yoga chants all night long that would keep you up. But as far as a player goes, this guy was an excellent player. He was playing center field one time, and Steve Hargan was pitching for us. Willie got drilled in the bottom of whatever inning it was, and when he took his spot in center field, he just assumed that Hargan was going to drill the next hitter. Well, when he didn't drill him with the first 2 pitches, Willie knelt down like a catcher on the 3rd pitch and stayed in that position. Now, the batter didn't hit it to him, and I didn't even notice it until I heard one of the coaches say to Billy, "Hey, Billy, look at Davis." And he did it again. He crouched down, and Billy jumps out of his seat, gets to the top step of the dugout, and if Willie Davis didn't stand up for the next pitch, Billy was on his way out to center field. He'd already had one step on the top of the dugout. And this foray onto the field would have made the argument between Billy and Reggie Jackson in Fenway when Billy confronted him when he got back to the dugout. And Elston Howard broke up the fight because Billy didn't think that Reggie hustled for a ball. This would have been a confrontation with a star player in the middle of center field during a game in front of the whole world. It never happened, but when we would talk about that afterwards, I mean, we didn't want that to happen. Obviously, it's not good for the game, but vicariously, all of us would say, man, I would love to have seen if Billy sprinted out to center field. Would he have gotten to center field? Would anybody have stopped him? Would Davis have run toward it? I don't know what would have happened, but it would have been a remarkable scene that was probably replayed to this day.
Beside his fieriness, did Billy have a sense of humor? Because if you think back to that gimmick he did with Steinbrenner, that one press conference where they start pretending to argue, and then Steinbrenner goes, "You're fired again." I mean, Billy must have had this sense of humor and playfulness.
Yeah, I wish I could recount some of that for you, some specific things. I can't, but yeah, he was personable. He didn't mind hanging around with the players. He didn't consider the hotel bar off limits to the players like most managers did. So if you went into the hotel bar, he might have a drink with you. If you love to golf, he might want to go golfing with you. One of my favorite moments was the Billy Martin golf tournament that he had. I don't know whether it was 74 or 75. And his best friend was Mickey Mantle, and my childhood idol was Mickey Mantle. And Mickey played in this golf tournament. And I'll never forget. I wanted to go up so badly and talk to him. I was too nervous to do that, but I perched myself about a seat away from where Billy and Mickey were and just kind of eavesdropped on their conversation. And it was a great moment for me having a chance to do that. So yeah, he was personable. He had a sense of humor. He wasn't a drill sergeant all day long, every day. I think one of the things you liked about him was he was an everyday guy. He was funny, personable. The kind of guy that if you said yourself, "I'm going to get stuck on a plane next to someone for a few hours, who would you like it to be?" He'd be one of the guys you pick.
Billy managed so many teams, but I think of the Twins and Rangers, and every time I think of those two teams, the Washington Senators come to mind because both iterations of the Senators became the Twins and then the Rangers. You were drafted by that second Washington Senators franchise. Did you think your whole career was going to be back east, and then all of a sudden the team moves to Texas, where basically you've spent the rest of your life?
No. Obviously, at the time, I had no idea that was going to happen. It turned out that the Senators were by far the worst franchise in baseball. They made the early Ranger teams look like the Yankees practically in the way they did things. Their minor league system was the worst system. Their scouting department was the worst scouting department. So it was a woeful team to be drafted by. But as far as location goes, I loved being in Washington the half season I played there. My roommate was Jackie Brown, and we lived not far outside D.C., and we could drive by the monuments, drive by the White House if we wanted to on the way to the ballpark. It wasn't that far from New England, so it was easy for my family and my friends to get to Washington. And so just the history of it, the nearness to New England, I actually loved being in Washington. I don't think I was looking forward at all to going to Texas. Never been there. Most of the guys hadn't. Some guys adapted to it a lot quicker than others. I never in the world imagined that I would live in Texas. My family would grow up in Texas. I was 100% certain I would play the season and go back to Massachusetts. But, things happen, things change, and that changed for me. But I was very disappointed at first when the team moved from Washington to Texas. Turned out to be a great move for the franchise, great move for a lot of us who have stayed in Texas, and great move for my family for that matter.
Yeah, well, what's the joke? Washington, George Washington first in our country, first president, first in our country. Washington Senators last in the American League.
Yeah, first in war, first in peace, last in the American League.
Right.
I know that pretty well because I've heard my parents used to say that to me when I would be back in Massachusetts. Yeah, we really weren't very good. It was not a good franchise. Fortunately, things changed. And Billy was a huge part of the Texas Rangers franchise turning around. The first 2 years in Texas, 72 and 73, we drew, 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 fans. Nobody came to the games. The people that did were great fans, but it was a football state, football town, and no one came to the games. Billy revitalized baseball. People came to the games because it was the thing to do. Obviously, watching Fergie pitch was one thing. It was a good young team with some talent, but Billy was a colorful guy. I don't think Billy would have thrived as much in today's game with instant replay. Half the fun was watching Billy and Earl Weaver manage against each other, and in a bad game, they could be the best part of the show. So that kind of thing energized our fans. We had a good season, and I think that was the first moment where people in Texas might have said, you know what, this franchise can be successful here, and baseball is a good thing. He had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, you just mentioned it about Martin. You talked about Willie Davis and Elston Howard and Reggie Jackson. How would Martin deal with the players of nowadays? It's a little bit different now.
It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. I don't know that a manager can have the same control. Back then, agents had just started to come into the game, so most of us didn't have agents. Back early in the 70s, there was no free agency, there was no salary arbitration. So the manager and the team had a little bit different kind of control over the players. It's still possible for managers today to gain trust, to gain respect, and for a team to rally around a manager and play to their capabilities. That still happens. But I think, I would have to say that manager for manager, it was easier to manage back then than it is now as far as the players go. It's a different game, different kind of players. It's not one's good and one's bad, but it's just different. And I don't know that Billy would be the same manager today that he was back then. But if anyone from back then could translate to today, I think Billy would be one of the ones that could, because he was smart, he was streetwise, he was savvy, and I think he would have figured out a way to relate to today's player. And in spite of the things that I just mentioned, salaries, agency, salary arbitration, all those things being here today, huge contracts, ownership much more involved. I think Billy Martin might have been the kind of guy that could have figured out how to identify with the players and get them to play well to the capabilities that they had.
When you were a GM, would you have considered hiring a guy like Martin if he was available and doing what he did back in the day?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know that I would. I was a young manager, a general manager, feeling my way through it. I guess I did take a huge risk in basically the only manager I ever hired, and that was Bobby Valentine. Mm-hmm. So I guess I should say I would have considered it, because Bobby was a lot like Billy. Bobby was a fiery guy that knew the game inside and out, wasn't afraid to take a risk. Bobby and I had played together with the Mets, and we both sat on the bench together that year. I knew that Bobby was going to be a manager. Joe Torre was our manager, and Bobby second-guessed and good-naturedly every move Joe ever made. And, I always said to myself, I thought Bobby would make a great manager. Mm-hmm. I had no idea that 5 or 6 years later, I'd be in a position to hire a manager, and it was Bobby. So I think based on those circumstances, if I was in a position and Billy was available, for a lot of reasons I would have been, but for the following reason, I wouldn't have been. I would have been looking for a manager who I thought would be our manager 10 years from now. Mm. And, if I was looking for a manager, if I said to myself, you know what, if we don't win in the next 2 years, I'm getting fired, and so is everybody else here. We have to win right now. Obviously, it's a no-brainer. Billy's the guy you hired. But if you're the kind of team and general manager where you're willing to take your lumps, like Houston did a couple of years ago, and A.J. Hinch became a great manager for them. If you're willing to take your lumps and believe in scouting and believe in your manager, and you want that guy to be there for 10 years, then I don't think Billy is your guy. And we were a perfect example. Whitey Herzog was a terrific baseball guy. He had charisma, and he had spunk and energy. But his assignment wasn't to win right now. And so, he was cultivating young arms and young players. And all you have to do is look to what happened when he got fired. He went to Kansas City, and then he went to St. Louis, and he built there, and he won there, and he went to the Hall of Fame. I have to think that same thing would have happened in Texas had he stayed there. We wouldn't have had the success immediately that Billy had. But, you know, just one example, when Billy came, we traded Bill Madlock for Fergie Jenkins. Well, we got 25 wins out of Fergie, and we're a mild contender and drew 1 million fans for the first time with Billy as the manager and Fergie Jenkins as our pitcher. But Bill Madlock won batting championships and was a 300 hitter for who knows how many years for the Cubs. If we had kept Bill Madlock to go along with the nucleus that we had of Burroughs and Hargrove and Sundberg and players like that, the young pitchers we were developing, I really think we would have been a team that won over the long haul. So that's way more than you were looking for with your question. But the way I would answer that, I would have hired Billy if I had to win now, and I would have hired Whitey Herzog if building for the future and the long term was what mattered.
Much of Martin's downfall, wherever he was centered, wherever he was centered around alcohol. It was really his demise, quite literally. How different of a man was he sober compared to when he was drinking? As is the case with many people, it was really a demon that he fought most of his life.
It really was. And I become good friends with his son, Billy Jr., lives here in Arlington. And, you know, even Billy will talk about that it was a problem for his dad. I wasn't around Billy when he'd been drinking. Most of the players weren't. But it was pretty obvious that he was a different kind of guy. You know, when he wasn't drinking, when he was at the ballpark, he didn't impress you as the kind of guy that would, you know, want to fight at the drop of a hat and be belligerent. But evidently, that's what happened when he was drinking. And the other thing that happened to Billy is he had such a reputation of being a tough guy and being an aggressive manager, an aggressive personality, that people sought him out. People picked fights with him. People had their own problem with drinking and got to the bar and said, Billy Martin, I'm going to go kick his ass. And they go up and they start picking on him. I don't think he picked the fights that he was in. He just never turned one down. And so when someone came up and started acting like that, you know, if they wanted a fight, they had one. He wasn't like maybe like you and I would be, where you see trouble coming and maybe you walk away from it. Hopefully we do. Billy saw trouble coming and he met it head on, and whatever happened, happened. So that was a big problem for him, but I don't think those things happened when he wasn't drinking. So I would say that probably was one of his downfalls in different places. And it happened away from the ballpark. It's too bad, but that's part of his life, and that's part of who he was.
So we do a segment on the show, a trivia segment called 50-50. I give you a 50% chance to answer a trivia question from 50 years ago. And we're going to do something on Billy Martin. So true or false? Billy was actually not his for real first name.
I've seen this. I'm wanting to say false, but I want to say Billy was his given name.
Nope. Yeah, you go with your gut. Go with your gut.
What was his name?
Alfred Manuel Martin Jr.
I should have known that.
Apparently his grandmother spoke Spanish, and as a baby would call him Bella, Bella, like beautiful, and that just turned into Billy. At least that's how the story goes.
You know what? I was lamenting my memory earlier in the show based on my age now, and believe me, that's one that's a little embarrassing that I didn't remember that.
Well, I would go with Billy over Alfred any day. So,
well, so would he, and he did.
He did. But
True.
Alfred Martin didn't have the pull.
Yes. But I have one other question for you. Okay, so you never got to have Nolan Ryan as a teammate, but as a general manager, you got to watch him pitch for your team. What kind of? Just to me, Nolan Ryan, just the longevity and I don't know, just the stuff he had just defies gravity, logic, whatever you want to call it. Can you talk about Nolan?
Sure. How much time you got left?
as long as you want.
All right. Well, break in if I'm talking too long. But
Oh,
Nolan is obviously a unique player. There's never been anyone like him, and there never will be. I played against Nolan. I tried to hit against Nolan. I admired Nolan. And as I mentioned, Bobby Valentine was our manager. Well, Nolan had played for the Astros. He'd had a big year. He was a free agent. He was asking for $1 million. And the owner, I can't even think of his name now, but the owner for the Astros said no one's worth $1 million. And it looked like there might be a chance that Nolan was going to leave Houston. So I said to our president, Mike Stone, we might have a chance to sign Nolan, but we have no money in our budget. We couldn't pay our minor league bat order, let alone pay $1 million or $2 million for Nolan Ryan. And Mike said, let me go to Eddie Childs, our owner. And he went to Eddie Childs and he said, we don't have the money, but we might have a chance if we did to sign Nolan Ryan. Eddie Childs knew nothing about baseball, but he's a Texan and he knew who Nolan Ryan was. And he said to Mike, you sign Nolan Ryan, let me worry about how we're going to pay him. And so I called Dick Moss's agent. It turned out that it might be likely he was going to leave the Astros. He loved Gene Autry, so it was between us and the Angels. Turned out he wanted to stay in Texas. It was at the winter meetings in 1989, I guess it was. Nolan was in Atlanta. I think it was, in Atlanta with his agent, Dick Moss. And I got a call from Mike Stone and he said, meet me over at room such and such across the street. I'm with Dick Moss and Nolan to negotiate a contract. And at the time, I just gotten back to the hotel room. I'd been jogging with Bobby Valentine. We didn't even change clothes. We went over there in a hurry in our workout attire, walked into the room, and it was a unique negotiation. It's a slight exaggeration to say we put a contract in front of him, Nolan, signed it and said, you fill in the figures, but it was almost that. We basically knew we were going to sign him, and we knew that we wanted to be fair, but there was something about Nolan and his Texas drawl and being a Texan that you felt he would be fair to. He wouldn't squeeze the last dime. You shook his hand, you had a deal. I mean, he was a true Texan in and out. And so we were comfortable in that regard. And Nolan told us what he wanted. It didn't, it was high, but it didn't astound us. We thought it might be more, and it would have been for another player of his talent. We said, okay, the contract was signed, and we had to run back to the hotel and change clothes. And, Bobby and I have replayed this 100 times, but we got outside the hotel room, closed the door, and we're in the hallway, and it was spontaneously, we jumped as high as we could and high-fived. It was like two people giddy about the idea that we were going to have Nolan Ryan. Bobby was going to be his manager, and I was going to be his general manager, but at the time we felt like fans. And as high as our expectations were, Nolan exceeded every one of them tenfold. He turned out to be even a more incredible guy than we expected. I can give you so many examples, but one example would be every other homestand on the way to the ballpark for the first day of the homestand, 2 or 3 hours before he needed to be at the ballpark, he would drive, go to the Ranger offices, and the PR department and anyone else in the office would have accumulated a couple of weeks worth of things that they wanted signed for fans, for sponsors, for whatever. And Nolan would sit there and sign these, tell stories, and the whole office would be there while he was signing these things. He would leave, and they would say, can't believe that Nolan Ryan just came by and did that. Spring training, after maybe 4 or 5 games during spring training, get a chair, go out in the parking lot, and sign autographs until the fans stopped going by. For an hour and a half, he would sign those autographs. Our sponsors came to spring training one time, and one of the things they were going to get to do was hit on the major league field. And I can remember walking by to watch this, having no idea that part of the deal was that Nolan Ryan would pitch batting practice to him. And so here I walk by, 2 days before spring training start, 2 days after a spring training start, and here's Nolan in full uniform throwing batting practice to 15 or 20 sponsors in 100-degree heat in Florida. Things like this happen. After he would pitch, you'd look out at the office building in right field, and you'd see him running up and down the stairs. When you interviewed him after a game, he'd be riding the stationary bike with sweat pouring off his face. Everything that you could imagine good about what it took to be a ball player, Nolan Ryan had. It was just incredible what he meant to our franchise. He gave us credibility and respect around the game that we'd never had before. And even just being on the team, not just the days that he pitched, but just being on the team, it was, especially in Texas, it was almost as if this is Nolan Ryan's team, therefore the Texas Rangers are my team. And so our fan base went from 1 million to 1.4 million, 1.5 million to 2 million while he was there. And a lot of people think that without Nolan, we might not have gotten the new beautiful stadium that we got because of the way that he captured the imagination of our fans. Every game that he pitched, the fans went to that game expecting a no-hitter. And whether the hit came in the first inning or the 8th inning, there was a noticeable groan when the other team got their first hit. While he was a Ranger, he won his 300th game. He struck out his 5,000th batter. He threw his, I think it was 6 and 7 or 7 and 8 no-hitter while he was here. It was just remarkable. And, the kind of guy he was, after he struck out his 5,000th batter, some kind of wisecracking reporter said, well, so you got 5,000. When do you think you're going to get 6,000? Like it was a joke. Mm-hmm. And Nolan didn't take it as a joke. It was like, to him, that's not out of the ordinary. I may be 40 years old, but I might be able to strike out another 1,000 guys. And so he answered it like it was a serious question. And I think the guy that asked it was a little bit flabbergasted. And, he went on, I don't know what his final total was. He went on to strike out 600 or 700 more batters. So that's probably, again, a lot of words, but I can't think of anything else I could say other than Nolan Ryan was more spectacular and exceeded our expectations by tenfold based on what he meant to our franchise.
I just want to say, Tom, being an Angels fan, I'm sure glad they let him go.
Well, Nolan will say when he talks about this decision that it wasn't easy because Gene Autry meant the world to him, and he had a good experience while he was in Anaheim. They couldn't pay him what he was paid in Houston, and he wanted to go back home, probably more so than the money. But when he had a choice to go to Anaheim or Texas, that was not an easy choice for him. The fact that he lived in Texas, I think, swayed him. But if he lived in California, he would have been an Angel for sure.
So, if I can read between the lines, you think Ryan signing with the Rangers worked out?
I think it worked out. When people introduce me at a luncheon or something like that, they'll say a couple of my credentials, and they will say, and Tom Grieve is the man that signed Nolan Ryan, as if this is a huge feather in my personal cap. And I can't emphasize enough that I was the general manager when Nolan signed, but I only did what the ownership gave us the money to do and what any sane human being in the same position would have done. So I reaped the benefits of Nolan being here for 5 years, but it's tough to say that I sat down and made a calculated, wise decision to sign Nolan Ryan. That was the no-brainer of all time.
I grew up an A's fan, was born in Berkeley, just like Alfred Martin was. And I loved those Billy Ball teams in 1980, 81, and 82. In 1979, the A's were 54 and 108. And in 1980, he did what he does, 83 and 79, just like what he did with you, Tom, back in the early 70s, mid-70s, when he transformed the Rangers from a bunch of losers to a team that was competing with the swinging A's. Mr. Ranger, can't thank you enough for joining us today on the Past Our Prime podcast. The man who signed Nolan Ryan.
Well, Scott, thanks for ending that way. And guys, it was a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Enjoy your day. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome.
That's great.
Thank you.
5,714. That's the number of strikeouts Nolan Ryan finished with. So he had 714 more after the reporter asked that question to Ryan flippantly. Do you think he can get to 6,000? And you know what? Ryan, it wasn't like he struggled at the end of his career.
Wow.
He was doing just fine. He had one of those things where basically threw a pitch, his arm fell off almost. I mean, the arm just basically gave out.
Yep.
So,
What did he pitch? 25 years?
Yep.
20,
and he threw
maybe
hard
more.
his
He
whole
threw a
career.
no-hitter, or was it a perfect game in his 40s?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, he was still throwing gas.
Yep. All right, let's move on and wrap this up, shall we? For the record, Bill.
Well, I'm just going to say that Kentucky won the ABA finals in 5 games over the Pacers. Artis Gilmore averaged 25 and 25 points, 21 rebounds. And then Dan Issel, who was sort of, not as highly ranked up as Gilmore at that time, had averaged 21 and 12. But Issel didn't stay in Kentucky. A few months later, he was traded to Memphis for Tom Owens. And then Memphis shipped him to Denver for Dave Robish. And then in the NBA, Issel became a Hall of Famer. And I just thought the amazing thing about Issel, in his whole NBA career, 1,218 games, he only missed 20 of them. So he didn't believe in the load management.
He sure didn't. No, he was a great scorer, man.
He sure was.
Yeah. Very good. I saw that Artis Gilmore had 28 points and 31 rebounds in that clinching Game 5 win. Man, that is just something. 31 boards. They don't do that anymore.
Has anyone had 30 rebounds? I mean, I'm sure they have. I don't pay attention
They have.
to the NBA recently.
Recently, I mean, not this year there weren't. But yeah, it does. There'll be a fluke where it will happen every once in a while, but it's been a while. Mark, what do you got?
I got Lefty Grove passing away. Famous baseball pitcher. Can you guess if he was a right-hander or a left-hander? Anyway, Lefty Grove died at the age of 75. Wow. He won 300 games in his career. He had 2,266 strikeouts. He was a 6-time All-Star. He won 2 World Series. He was the AL MVP in 1931, inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1947. He played his first 9 seasons with the Philadelphia A's, and then he ended his career with the Boston Red Sox. But really one of the great left-handed pitchers and pitchers in general in baseball history.
Yep. And it was funny when I saw that blurb, I forget what his name is. It's something like Robert Allen Grove. I'm like, who the hell's that?
Yeah, who's that?
And then I'm like, oh, Lefty. Okay.
Sort of like Alfred Martin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How about this one? Traded Phoenix Suns guard Charlie Scott to the Boston Celtics for reserve guard Paul Westphal and 75 and 76 second-round draft picks. The Suns' top scorer, Scott, averaged 24.3 points per game this season, had a couple of good years in Boston, helped them win a championship in 76, but Westphal really blossomed once he got to Phoenix and became one of the Suns' all-time greats. I think he was there for 6 years and was an all-star for 5 of them. So he became a great shooter while in the desert. Faces in the crowd. Billy.
Okay, let's talk about Craig St. Amour. He was a senior swimmer at Babson College and was voted All-American for the 3rd time. At Babson College, he won a total of 103 races while setting 35 pool records across New England. He also qualified for the Olympic trials back in 1975. But he had some children. One of them was Roberta R.C. St. Amour. Roberta, one of her sisters, and Father Craig swam the English Channel relay style, alternating swimming every hour. But that wasn't enough for Roberta. She was also a contestant on the CBS show Survivor. She was voted out on day 19. Tell you, not a bad family there.
Yeah.
A bunch of survivors on that family.
Now, she also looked good in a bathing suit, but that's another story.
Yeah. Nice. Wow. Yes, and people think like Survivor. A lot of times, what happens in Survivor is they vote out the people that are the best
Yes.
Right.
because they don't want they want to get rid of them.
She
So
was projected to win
yeah,
that season.
yeah. That's I never watched the show, but I would hate that.
I watched the first 2 seasons and never watched it again.
Yeah. Mark.
I have Todd Heimer. He's a pitcher first baseman at Seton Hall University. He went hitless in his first 5 at-bats this season. Then he hit 4 homers against Wagner College. His next hit was also a homer, but he hasn't hit one since. But he leads the pitching staff with a 6-0 record.
I
So
can.
he ended up being in the Seton Hall of Fame. And he was drafted by the Cleveland Indians in 1976 in the 23rd round. He was in the minors from 1977 to 81, but never made it to the show.
Can I add a little bit on that, Mark, if you don't mind?
Sure, absolutely.
That at Seton Hall, there was Todd Heimer and Don Morigilio. They had a little switch thing they did. Morigilio would sprint in from the bullpen and relieve, and Heimer, the left-handed starter, would hand over the ball and the glove too, because Todd Heimer never had a pitching glove. He didn't have enough money to buy one. So he borrowed it from the guy in the bullpen, and they would switch on the mound when he replaced him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good little tidbit there. And it just goes to show you how great these players are because here's a guy that's in the Seton Hall of Fame. He can hit, he can pitch. He just, once you start getting to the majors, they're just so good. It's so hard to get there. We
Yep.
sometimes lose sight of that. Billy, what else you got?
I got Andrea Cross. She's a 12-year-old from St. Joseph, Michigan. She set the age group record in swimming and was named most outstanding swimmer in her age group at the AAU State Championships in Royal Oak. But that's not enough. Now she goes by Andrea Mead Cross, and she's recognized as one of the premier sports photographers in the country. She's worked with Sports Illustrated, ESPN, National Geographic, Outside Magazine, and Fitness. But we had Walter Yos on our show. He was a Sports Illustrated photographer. He does live shots, or he does like action shots.
Mhm.
She does covers, not action shots. And her work is beautiful.
Wow, I have to keep an eye out for her for sure. That takes me to this, the 19th hole. It's about thundering hooves from the writer Gary Dobbs in Alabama. He says, please enlighten us as to the fate of photographer Jerry Cook after he snapped the picture for your May 12th
Mhm.
cover on the Kentucky Derby. That was when Foolish Pleasure, written by Jacinto Vasquez, was on the cover. Certainly, he must have been trampled to death or worse. Not sure what worse would be, but anyway. And Sports Illustrated writes back to him, Cook was never as far out in the track as the photograph makes it appear. And when the picture was taken, he was not even there. He had mounted his camera on a metal plate, painted black so as not to reflect light into the horse's eyes, and secured it under the rail. As the leaders came into view, he used a remote control system to trigger the shutter. Now, 50 years ago, that was state of the art stuff. Now, what that would be laughed at, but that was just another way that Sports Illustrated, just a reminder
Yep.
that it's called Sports Illustrated and the photos often go overlooked, but were very much an integral part of the magazine. And, they went above and beyond to get the photos that were just unbelievable. Another 19th hole, Mark.
Yeah. Mark Trowell and Bill Trollinger from St. Paul wrote, Sir, if Dave Winfield is a superstar, you are the everyday run who are the everyday run-of-the-mill stars. By our account, 81 of major league players are superstars, not to be outdone by representatives of the national pastime. A whopping 92% of the NBA players would put themselves in the superstar category. What is particularly disturbing is the vast majority are not them. They've had one good year, basically. So,
I like how he
maybe he
sounded
had a
so
point,
angry
but
there.
now with Dave Winfield,
He sounded so angry there, Mark.
they both did. Mark
Yes,
and
I'm
you know
not
what's funny? What are their first names? Mark and Bill.
exactly. We were both pissed off that day.
Where was Scott writing this letter? Damn it.
Yeah,
I was
probably
I was
typing
hiding
it.
in the closet from a couple of crazed maniacs.
Now, let me ask you guys a question, because Scott just said this word. Is it integral or integral?
Integral.
Because Scott said integral.
When did I say that?
right when you said he was an integral part of something.
Ah,
So I'm trying to see if that's I don't know what the word is now. You screwed me up.
all right. Look it up. And I'll bet you'll find that it can be pronounced both ways.
It will. No, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it is. It's like often and often.
Right. Aunt and
A-
aunt.
Again and again.
Idiot and idiot.
It's
Yes.
both coming from this side.
Hey, I want to thank Mr. Ranger Tom Grieve for coming on and talking about Billy Martin. Hard to believe that Billy died 36 years ago. He was such a force, and Tom shared some great stories on him. I was really prepared for Tom to come on and say, he was great, but he was a real pain in the ass. And, people couldn't wait for him to leave. But it was kind of the complete opposite, wasn't it? I mean, he seemed to adore Billy Martin.
Yeah. He said, yeah. And he said he was the best manager he ever played for.
Yeah.
Which is surprising because I sort of got into Billy Martin mid-70s. But when you heard things about him, you thought, oh, he must have been hell to play for. But then you realize he just got the best out of every player that obviously listened to him. Because he, like you said, Scott, he just turned every team around when he got there.
Yeah. And I think, the players were like, this guy's got our back for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah, that's the key.
Hey, we'll do it again in a week. Until then, I'm Scott, that's Bill, that's Mark, and we are past our
All
prime.
right, good night.
See ya.